How's it going, everybody? I'm Dave Glavin, an aspiring NBA salary cap strategist. And today I'll be discussing how the Dallas Mavericks can operate this offseason after moving on from Anthony Davis at this season's trade deadline. From an asset management perspective, this deal solidifies what turned out to be a disastrous return for Luka Doncic. But with that being said, I respect their front office for pulling the plug. The trade is a financial home run. It gives them the flexibility in both the short and long term to begin building the roster around Cooper Flagg. They came into the deadline well over the first apron, and with this move, they were able to duck the tax entirely while also clearing the 2 years and over 120 million plus remaining on Davis's deal, as well as the 12 million owed to D'Angelo Russell and Jaden Hardy next season. So, taking a look at the trade itself, in addition to the financial flexibility that they generated, the Mavs increased their available roster building tools by adding 5 draft picks and generating 3 trade exceptions, including a near $21 million one for Davis's outgoing salary. They were able to create those exceptions by structuring the deal in 5 separate trades, as shown here. First of which, they used the expanded trade exception with Russell's outgoing salary to take back Tyus Jones and A.J. Johnson. They took in Marvin Bagley III using the minimum player salary exception and generated that Davis trade exception for the difference in his salary and Middleton's expiring. The last 2 trade exceptions were generated for Hardy and Exum's outgoing salary, and they received what will almost certainly be the Thunder's first-round pick. It's the least favorable of the Rockets, Clippers, and Thunder this season, as well as a 2030 Golden State first, which is top 20 protected. That's from the Jordan Poole salary dump. And that'll become a 2030 Golden State second if it doesn't convey as a first. They also added a Phoenix second in this year's draft, as well as a Bulls second next year and a Rockets second in 2029. The deal also allows them to improve their own draft position down the stretch, which is going to be their last opportunity to do so for the foreseeable future, as they don't control their own pick until 2031. While the 2026 draft class is headlined by those top 3 guys, Darren Peterson, AJ DeBansta, and Cam Boozer, it also projects to be one of the deeper lead guard classes in recent memory, which I believe is their biggest long-term positional need. And post-trade deadline, they sit about 5.4 million below the tax with a full 15-man roster, which is important to note as both Andrew Nembhard and Moussa Cisse have less than 10 games remaining of two-way eligibility. Both guys have been inactive for the Mavs' last 3 games, and the deadline acquisitions of Tyus Jones and Marvin Bagley III suggest that Dallas probably isn't in a rush to convert them. Despite reducing their payroll significantly, if they did want to convert them, they would only be able to offer minimum level deals as they use the tax mid-level in the offseason to sign D'Angelo Russell. We'll get an answer in a few weeks with 2 key dates coming up. The first of which is March 1st, which is the last day for a waived player to be postseason eligible with a new team, and March 4th, which is the last day for teams to sign new two-way players. If Dallas wanted to convert Nembhard and Cisse, I feel like Chris Middleton and Marvin Bagley stand out to me as 2 veterans who may generate some buzz in the buyout market and would have interest in playing more meaningful minutes down the stretch of this season. As far as the state of the roster, they'll enter the summer with 12 roster spots filled, including the 2 cap holds for their first-round picks. Their Phoenix second-round pick is not mentioned in this projection, but they do have that as well. They've got about $40 million in space below the tax to work with, and will operate as an above-the-cap team after renouncing Chris Middleton's almost $50 million cap hold, which would grant them access to the non-tax mid-level and biennial exceptions. They've also got those 3 trade exceptions at their disposal that they generated at the deadline, 4 tradable first-round picks, depending on what years they chose, as well as 5 second-round picks. Their key free agents include the newly acquired Chris Middleton and Tyus Jones, as well as Brandon Williams and Dwight Powell. Marvin Bagley will be a free agent as well. Here's their 3-year outlook. It's important to note that the projections for the cap in 2027-28 and 2028-29 are assuming 10% growth, which may be overestimating a little bit given that next season the cap is only expected to rise 7%. But overall, the books are clear of any significant negative contracts, and they have just 3 current players under contract in 2028-29. As far as this offseason, Klay Thompson, Caleb Martin, Najee Marshall, Max Christie, and Derek Lively all become extension eligible, with Lively being the only guy that they would have to make a decision on prior to the start of next season. While he was a key part of their 2024 finals run, he's played less than 100 regular season games over his first 3 seasons, and I think that makes a long-term agreement impossible. Marshall and Christie seem like the likely extension candidates, with co-interim GM Matt Riccardi describing those 2 guys as perfect fits next to Cooper. And I'd like to highlight what Dallas could offer them this summer. Christie has been the one bright spot from the Doncic trade, averaging career highs in points, rebounds, and assists on 63% true shooting, while providing pretty solid perimeter defense. He has 2 years, $17 million remaining on his deal, including a near $9 million player option in 2027-28. And based on his age, only 23, and his production, I would expect him to opt out of that player option, as he's worth more than that. The max extension that Dallas can offer this offseason is 4 years, roughly $52 million, with a starting salary of about $11.5, which is 140% of his current base for next season, with 8% raises. I would expect him to decline this because with another improved season, he could warrant the full non-tax mid-level, which projects to be north of $16 million when he can become a free agent in 2027. Marshall has put together the 2 most productive seasons of his career in his first 2 seasons with Dallas. I think the fact that he's on the roster past the deadline would suggest that there's mutual interest in an extension this offseason, just because I think he was a pretty attainable target for many contending teams given his contract status. The max extension that Dallas can offer is a 4-year, nearly $60 million deal with a starting salary of $13.2 million. Again, that's 140% of his base for next season, with 8% raises as well. I believe this is pretty fair average annual value for Marshall. However, I think Dallas would opt for a 2 or 3 year structure, just given his age. Superstars in the NBA are disproportionately more important than any other North American sport. I think the Mavs have found the next face of their franchise in Cooper Flagg. The AD trade awarded them the financial flexibility to begin building around him. And while the general rebuilding model is to use that space for undesirable contracts and accumulating draft capital, I think his emergence as a legitimate all-star level player already and their lack of draft pick control through the rest of the decade should change their approach a little bit. While I'm not saying they should go all in, they should be wary of taking back long-term bad money just to add picks. I think similar to what we've seen with Wembanyama in San Antonio, players are going to want to play alongside Cooper Flagg because of how he can elevate their careers. With that being said, I think they're going to have opportunities this summer to get value for at least one of their veterans. Barring a return this season, I don't expect Kyrie Irving to be on the move. His game is really predicated on his quickness and footwork, so teams will definitely want to see a significant sample size of 25, 30 games of his post-ACL form before giving up anything of significant value. I also believe Flagg could really benefit from some time next to him, so there's that as well. Klay Thompson's Mavericks experience has gone all but according to plan, and he's entering the last year of his 3-year, $50 million deal. He's as competitive as they come, but really hasn't lived up to that contract and still demands a bit too much on the offensive end, for my liking at least. His veteran experience is certainly valuable to have in the locker room, but I think a mutual parting of ways this summer would be best for both sides. In this projection, I have him agreeing to a buyout where he would give back the amount of the projected tax mid-level exception, which is what I would think he would command in free agency. So the Mavericks would have a dead cap hit of a little over $11 million. Their 2 2024 trade deadline acquisitions, PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, are both entering the first year of new extensions and have struggled to replicate the production from their first season and a half with the team. I think given the increasing demand for big man depth across the league, as well as the weaker projected supply this offseason, whether that's in the draft or in free agency, I think Gafford would return positive value in a trade. The Hawks were reported to have interest at the deadline, but they were unwilling to part with what projects to be the Cleveland Cavaliers first rounder this season. It currently sits at number 22. However, they won 5 straight heading into the deadline, and they have the 5th easiest schedule remaining. Obviously, they've got a new look bringing in James Harden. If for some reason they were to pass the Spurs in the standings, Atlanta would have the Spurs pick instead. But regardless, I think they'd be willing to part with it if it landed beyond the 25th selection. While they do have Onyeka Okongwu, I think his skill set is more suited for a Naz Reid sixth-man type role, given his offensive ability, but he really struggles to anchor the paint for them, and I think Gafford could slot into the starting center role and provide much better interior defense. In this projection, I have Dallas bringing back Buddy Hield to replenish some of the shooting loss that they would no longer have if they were to buy out Thompson, as well as the 26th overall pick. They'd be able to take Hield into their non-tax mid-level and generate a new $17+ million trade exception for Gafford's outgoing salary. Hield's contract becomes fully guaranteed a day after the draft. So in this projection, this would be completed post-draft, and his contract will be fully guaranteed for next season. But if they didn't want him on the roster, they could complete it before the draft and waive him with just a $3 million guarantee that they would have to eat in dead cap. His contract has a similar structure for next season with a player option, but they'd be able to get out of that because there's only a similar $3 million guarantee with it becoming fully guaranteed a day after the draft. 2 other potential Gafford destinations, in my opinion, are the Cavs and Lakers. Cleveland's projected to be above the second apron again next season before filling out the rest of their roster. And while I expect Harden to sign an extension for a lower average annual value than where he's projected right now with his player option, I think replacing Jared Allen's new $28 million salary slot with Gafford's $17 million would give them much more flexibility to potentially re-sign Dean Wade or Keon Ellis. A third team would have to get involved, potentially Atlanta. Maybe they're more interested in Jared Allen, or the Lakers as well, because I don't think Dallas would be interested in Allen. But speaking of the Lakers, Gafford had the best season of his career alongside Luka Doncic, and they desperately need interior defensive help. So I do think Gafford would be a fit there as well. Just not sure if they'd be willing to give up first-round pick compensation, given that they're star hunting right now. Whether this offseason or before the deadline next year, I think Dallas has to utilize that Anthony Davis trade exception, ideally gaining draft capital in the process. In my last video on the Bulls, I identified Jonathan Isaac, Jarris Walker, Ben Shepherd, and Zeke Naji as potential trade candidates this summer, just given their team's respective financial crunches. I'd like to highlight Malik Monk as another guy who could be on the move and whose contract would fit almost perfectly into that Davis trade exception. Sacramento is projected to be just $1 million below the second apron next season, and that includes the cap hold for their first-round pick, which right now is projected to be the top pick in the draft. Most teams have 1, maybe 2 clear negative value contracts on their books. The Kings have at least 5. Zach LaVine and Domantas Sabonis are untradeable at this point without attaching assets, which you're not going to do, or what you shouldn't do as a rebuilding team, as the worst team in the league. But that leaves DeMar DeRozan, the newly acquired DeAndre Hunter, and Malik Monk as, in my opinion, likely trade candidates to give them some financial relief. I know DeMar DeRozan has a slight guarantee on his deal, which might make him the most attractive option, where he'd also be on an expiring. But Monk has 2 years, $40+ million remaining on his deal, and he's had a pretty inconsistent role this season in what's just been a dumpster fire in Sacramento. But in this projection, I have them taking him into that Davis trade exception while also acquiring the Timberwolves 2031 unprotected first that they got in the De'Aaron Fox trade, as well as a 2033 Sacramento second. While that might be a rich price for a salary dump, I think if Dallas insisted on an unprotected pick, Sacramento would be more willing to give up somebody else's draft pick than their own, just given their track record and how much they've really struggled over the past decade plus. I could also see like a top four protected pick being included instead, if Sacramento was not willing to part with an unprotected pick. Following these moves, Dallas would have 2 open roster spots remaining, one of which I think is reserved for Dwight Powell on the minimum. Cuban, I saw a report he shut down the idea that Powell would retire after this season. He's beloved amongst the community and in the locker room as he's the longest tenured Maverick. And that would leave one slot open for one of Tyus Jones, Brandon Williams, and Ryan Nembhard. And they would have enough space below the tax to utilize nearly all of their 2 remaining trade exceptions if they were to sign Brandon Williams to a 2-year deal. Say $5 million average annual value like I have here in this projection. He'd get a slight raise from what he's making right now. I think there'd be a team option on the second year, but really any of those 3 guys could fit here. Taking a look at how those moves would affect their 3-year outlook, assuming they re-sign Derek Lively and Najee Marshall, they would not project to be a cap space team in 2027. But that's if they acquired Malik Monk. But they would retain that significant spending power the following summer. I appreciate anybody who tuned in. This video does not intend to project what Dallas is going to do, but I just wanted to show the optionality that they'll have following the Anthony Davis trade and some examples of how they can use that flexibility financially, as well as the roster building tools that they generated to plan for the future around Cooper Flagg. Thank you.